Great to record.
All right, I'm starting recording now.
It's probably too
All right,
late.
we had 2 good points.
Hey,
Yeah.
no, that was great actually, because you just explained the pluggable protocol thing in a way that I had not got an understanding of yet. So that is very, very cool, and I appreciate that enormously. Thank you very much.
And I was at
the other
the
thing I was going to say was I think that there's a kind of connection there, because what you're describing as how we do it at the moment is kind of embarrassingly Newtonian.
Yeah.
You know, it's all stuck in a pre-relativistic and quantum physics world.
Yeah.
And it's kind of bizarre that this incredibly sophisticated computing infrastructure that we've got is trapped in the 19th century. It hasn't caught up with ideas that have been around since 1905.
I wonder to what extent it actually is, part of it is fueled by a fear of failure, right?
That's a really interesting observation. Yeah.
Living systems are not afraid of failure. They try things and things die, etc. But in the computer world, we're trying to make things where we can send something and we know it's going to get there.
Yep.
We know it's going to take the shape that we expected it to take, etc. And so we've been using this top-down. What's the standard? Okay, if you speak the standard and I read the standard the same way, then we can communicate, and we won't have any of those nasty failures, right? But that's not how the real world works. And the advantage of how the real world does work is that it's adaptable, evolvable, and you're able to learn from what works and what fails and change shape over time.
You're able to iterate. It's an interesting. I was at the IEEE conference on blockchain about a month and a half ago, and one of the guy, their blockchain guy, is also their standards body guy now. He's just sort of like fills 2 roles, and so he's in this blockchain space, and we're all definitely a room that does not lean towards imposing standards. Like front runners in industry. None of us want to be caged yet, and trying to explain what you just explained about pluggable protocols. And it's like, yeah, but if you go even deeper than standards, then it becomes there was one guy there who worked for Hyperledger. And he was like working on the side, but it's an interesting, even in that space, I think the acceptance of blockchain people, that standards would come, but not yet, that it's inevitable as an enterprise, as you start to do enterprise work.
Because it's the only model that they've known.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the whole point of Hyperledger is to create a standard.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's a standard that the enterprise folks can all turn to and go, okay, cool, now we can all talk to one another, because they don't know how to talk to one another if they don't have a common standard.
Yep. Very cool.
And to a certain extent, the P3 is a standard. It just breathes more and is more iterable. It's a decentralized standard, one that itself can be, where the protocol is open. To be rethought in and of itself. Like it's opening up that what I call backloaded process for being written.
I'd say the way Arthur and Eric would frame it is that it's, the way that the natural world works is we have protocols, and then if there's some stuff that uses that protocol, that all of a sudden becomes that becomes a carrier. So like their example that they use a lot is, we've got atoms. Those atoms all speak a protocol that's something like, hey, if this atom over here bumps into me, I'm going to bump that way, right? And since a whole bunch of air molecules that are all sitting next to one another speak that same protocol, they all subscribe to that same protocol. When an agent, Matthew, goes, and bumps an atom, which bumps the next atom, it creates a sound wave, right? That literally propagates across the room. It hits the microphone, whatever. It hits your eardrum, okay? So I'm an agent who's able to send a signal along a carrier. And if you are also able to receive that, I've now got an expressive capacity for sending sound, and you have a receptive capacity for receiving sound. So we have a grammar, an alignment or an overlap between what I'm able to express and what you're able to receive for sound. sound suddenly becomes a new protocol built on top of that carrier of one atom bumping into another, right? So you end up having that carrier, which was another protocol, leading to this new protocol sound. Well, that new protocol sound can become a carrier that we can use to build language, right? Different kinds of sounds, etc. From that perspective, P3 ends up being, yes, it is a protocol. It does become a standard. We're trying to build it in a way where it too can be evolved, but it's a standard that serves as a carrier that other protocols can ride on top of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas of how you get everyone to jump on Backgravy train?
On
Like,
what?
Build stuff that works.
I think,
and solves problems.
I think that's absolutely right. Build stuff, and then because it's pretty sophisticated, people are not going to get it. Not very many people are going to get this because it's a very different way of thinking about stuff. When you cross that boundary into the paradigm, it sort of it becomes embarrassingly obvious. But then, I've been doing this VSM stuff for decades, and to me, I can't even understand how anybody thinks they could do anything without knowing it. It's like, why would you try and do that? That's like trying to build artillery and fire artillery without knowing Newton's laws. What the hell would you do that for? That's stupid. Like, what's the matter with you, So it has that sense about it, but the way you demonstrate it is not by trying to convert people to believe it. Whoa.
Uh-oh.
Panic. What happened?
I don't know.
Is the house burning down? So I think you're right. You have to build stuff and make it work, and then hope that people are going to look at it and go, that's great. I'm going to use that. How did you do that?
Yeah.
That's kind of like Josh, you'd brought up singularity and then brought up what we're most excited about. And for me, there's kind of like an overlap there in the sense that singularity kind of proposes to know what it's going to look like in the next 50 years. And to me, that was like the initial sniff test. I was like, that's fucking bullshit. Like, don't believe anyone that tells you they know what the future is going to look like, especially when it comes to something as complex as like the interface between humans and technology over the next 50 years. And so like why it makes me excited about Ceptr and what we're working on is not only the momentum, but also like this sense that we're building to be able to iterate. Like at the very ground level, we're like, we don't know it all. We're looking at nature. We're trying to compare the things we're building to that because they seem to have worked for the longest period. And we know we don't know it all. And we need all the partners we can get. And we need people to tell us where we're wrong or to try new things to prove that we're wrong or prove that, the direction needs to be a little bit different. And it's the structure of how we're doing that as an organization that intuitively makes me super excited. Like that to me is almost more excited than the rational like frameworks of how everything gets laid out into the future. Like I think those are all cool heuristics and things that we can continue to learn from and continue to explain, because obviously the type of people that are in this world right now tend to be the ones that are focused on, the logical arguments of why this shit should work. But there's another layer, like this intuitive layer, that I think like hits me at a deeper core level on top of the logic stuff.
Nicholas, you okay? What happened?
I forgot. I burned a bagel in the oven.
Sorry. So we're kind of relieved that you didn't burn your house down.
Yeah, I thought it was just a bagel.
It wasn't nearly that close. It's just a little toasty there.
That's okay.
Toasty. That's okay. Looks like pumpernickel now, and everything bagel became a pumpernickel bagel.
An hour and 20-minute baked bagel.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
Bagel chips, bro. Bagel chips.
Third slices.
It was like, who is like barbecuing or baking?
Oh yeah, it's me.
Oh, that's burnt sesame seeds.
Yeah, right.
The way you bolted, we were like, oh shit, maybe the house is on fire. Like that, I think that's literally what Trevor said.
No.
Yeah.
I had the similar thing the other day, Nicholas. I was chatting on a video call like this, and I was just like, oh my God, flood. And I threw my earphones down because like the whole garage was flooding with the hose. The hose had like snapped, and there was like water flowing over everything. Lots of challenges with water recently.
Yeah, seriously, Jared.
It's been frustrating.
Oh.
You're like loaves and fishes, but with toilet water and.
Yeah, there were actually fishes coming out of the toilet. It was incredible.
Yeah,
I collected them in a basket.
Yeah. Returned him to the ocean.
That's
across
right.
the street. Well, I'd say successful potluck team. Really fun conversation.
For sure.
Spanned. You missed some pretty wacky stuff even at the beginning. I think people wouldn't have seen how intellectual we were gonna get if you would have watched the first 10 minutes, Josh.
Yay.
So
Yeah, sorry I missed it.
yeah, it's okay.
Anyway, glad you joined us. Very good.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's really cool to hear that. I really found anyone on a blockchain that's doing much biomimicry stuff. So it's cool to hear you guys.
To be very clear, we're not doing blockchain.
Oh no. Huh.
This is something that I was going to explain after Matthew. So the P3 holochain is a kind of a redesign of what blockchain does that allows the pluggable protocols that Matthew is talking about to be built on top of them. It's sort of a necessary layer for data integrity that then allows different options for scaling up applications and systems and actually protocol stacks off the top of them.
Interesting.
And so the first thing Ceptr is redoing, Art and Eric specifically, and mainly people that are more technical than us in this call, I don't know your skill level, are working on that, going through a security audit. It'll be finished sometime in June, is my understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And then hardening that a little bit so that we can do some sort of fuel cell for the ecosystem on top of it. But the main thing that actually makes the broader Ceptr ecosystem so powerful itself, I think, is the pluggable protocol. So I agree with Matthew. For where people are at right now, though, I think holochain, there's going to be a lot of cool stuff that you can just do with it that you can't do with blockchain. And so that's in and of itself, it's a great.
And the background there is that we've actually already built P cubed.
In C, it has to be.
But we built it as kind of this. We built it within a larger framework of what we were wanting to do with that. So we haven't built it as its own standalone thing. We built it in C. We're planning to rebuild that later this year as a standalone application in Go.
Yeah.
Holochain is built in Go, and the main difference between the main place where people who come from blockchain go, wait, what are you doing? Why would you do that? Holochain, we're not trying to create a ledger. We're not trying to create a consensus view of the recorded history of the group. Blockchains basically have every single participant holding on to a copy of everything that's ever happened. And our take on that is that the vast majority of social coordination, like things that you would want to do, like running a distributed app, etc., you don't need to hold on to everything that everybody has ever done. It's not required. That may be required for doing a Bitcoin type thing where you're generating tokens and you're trying to keep track of who has this token, but it's not required for other sorts of things, including other ways of doing money type trading. So within a holochain, you can do cryptocurrencies, but they look more like, Arthur usually uses an example of, he calls it mutual credit accounting, but I'll frame it like this. Leaving money aside, hey, if I did you a favor, you're like, hey, can you, watch my dog for the weekend? And I'm like, sure, no problem. We might keep track of that, right? And I might go, hey, I watched his dog. And you might go, hey, he watched my dog. Nobody else needs to know about that.
Yeah.
Right? Later on, if you're like, if I basically go, hey, can I borrow some sugar? Or can you watch my dog? You might go, sure. Right? And if for some reason we wanted to keep track of those things, we could. We don't need everybody else in the world to pay attention in order for us to keep track of the ways in which we've interacted, what our social relationship is looking like, what kinds of favors we've done for one another, etc. So it's a little different from there's a token, and we need to know who holds that token so that we can all, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's your point about currencies as a much broader perspective. I mean, one of the things, I was in this conference at Barcelona just last week, which was the 4th International Conference on Complementary Currencies. And I wrote a joint paper with John Waters, who's not here today, but probably join another potluck later. And the take we did was we used this management cybernetics stuff to kind of to start looking at, well, when people talk about the real economy, what the hell is the real economy? And actually, the answer is the real economy is a very rich and complex ecosystem with lots of different ways of valuing things all going on at the same time. And I've sort of analyzed this into what I call 5 moral modalities, but they're also recursive. And if that's the real economy, which is stuff like caring for the people we care about without any question about anybody owing anybody for that, which is like what's called love, it's like the stuff that keeps everything else going, well, you could conceive of the idea of a different sort of currency that supports that. And actually, if you think about it, these things ought to be there, but they don't exist, or they half exist. You've got government bonds, but government bonds don't distinguish between building submarines to annihilate cities and providing social services, which is like, well, why wouldn't you tell the difference between those two things? They're completely different. How stupid is that? So the basic idea is that you can have lots of different sorts of currency, because if you can have a financial system that is real, it needs to be a model of all the different values that we care about, not just a very narrow piece of value, which it is at the moment. So that's the messages, and this sort of way of thinking could build lots of different diverse currencies for lots of different uses that will give us a system that could manage the real economy, not the bullshit that we think is the economy.
Yeah.
I think that's a really significant idea.
To come right back around before we go anywhere else, Josh, I just want to get like a bellwether. How does that strike you in 30 seconds? But at a gut level, like hearing that described.
Hearing that, I just feel incredibly inspired, because I work mostly in the consciousness communities, and I feel like everyone's been dreaming of this for like since the 60s. For 50 years, they've been dreaming of a world where being a being of light and love to the people around you is actually valued by currency.
Yeah.
Like I actually feel like almost tears come to my eyes when I feel into that a little bit. So I find it very inspiring.
I would.
By the way, guys, just to cheer you up, no end. I've actually sent a copy of the paper I wrote last week to one of the 5 members of the Bank of England's research department on digital currencies. Because I'd met the woman and I thought, hey, I'll send her a copy of that and see what the hell she makes of it. I don't know whether that's going to go anywhere at all. She'll probably look at it and go, what the fuck is this guy talking about? Let's give it a go, see what happens.
Nicholas.
I just wanted to say that I think light and love pervades everything. It changes the notion of currency when you begin to function in this way. And I mean, currency is a very important concept within metacurrency and the way that we function, but the value in and of itself and packaging it and the notion that we have sovereignty or control or design agency over that within our own bodies, and we aren't displacing that towards some centralized entity somewhere else. That's how you really get traction with love, which permeates the whole world, when we really take responsibility for packaging ourselves and how we're going to do that. And that's a major upstep in consciousness, I think, for people. But when you get a tool that allows that to begin to happen, I think we'll be surprised at how quick people step into it. And the difference for me between holochain and blockchain is still functioning. Its design around scarcity, tokenization, very much creates the same patterns that, say, just the Fed system does now. It's not a significant improvement in our ability to package value. It does give let's say more people can package value with it, but the contours with which you can package and the sort of design decisions that you're going to have in that, in creating relationships, relying on minors and all of these different things, it just recreates many of the dynamics of the economic system that we're in right now. Holochain drops the bottom out of that, and there's certainly, I think, I won't go into social theory with it. Just, I think you're kind of feeling the agility that I'm getting at.
Yeah, I'm feeling energized.
Yeah.
I'll add to that and just say the focus on Holochain is enabling people to go, hey, we want to coordinate our relationships in a particular way. Meaning we want to set up some rules for how we want to play together and keep track of some things, right? So if this was a babysitting co-op, maybe we keep track of, whose kids you watched and were you on time? Did they go to bed when they were supposed to? Whatever. Like, there may be a handful of things that we want to pay attention to, and those are currencies. In that babysitting co-op, those would be signals that the members would want to be paying attention to, so that they could make decisions about who they were going to leave their kid with next time, right? But those are different currencies than some other group is going to pay attention to when they're running their fishery using another Holochain. They're going to be paying attention to different behaviors.
Different things are important.
And so the goal with Holochain is to enable distributed community management. And it's just the data integrity engine. It's just the thing that enables people to go, hey, I'm confident that thing hasn't been changed, that there wasn't fraud here, even though there's nobody in the middle keeping track of, holding on to the records, basically. But we do it in a different way from the blockchain world. And you can dive into the white papers for that.
Mm-hmm.
It does sound to me as though you have like a larger vision of how these new communities should operate beyond just the back end. Is that a fair assumption?
And,
a lot of what you're saying,
actively iterating on them.
No.
Yes, and I'd say we are we're not inventing it. We think that what we're doing is mimicking how complex adaptive systems work all over nature.
Huh.
We think that this is how the cells in your body coordinate and interact in a way that makes you a thriving, human being, even though they don't have a CEO cell, even though there's no blockchain that they're all looking to, right? Each of them is paying attention to certain signals. And based on the signals that they receive, they all got some shared set of instructions that they are running because you are an organism. So they've all got this shared set of instructions, DNA. And somewhere along that instruction set is some rules that say, hey, when you're faced with these circumstances, do this. And so that cell then behaves in a way that leads it to become a bone cell or a red blood cell or an eyeball cell or whatever, right? But they all have the same instructions. They're just running different parts based on the circumstances that they face. And there's sort of nested layers of that stuff happening and interacting models. So something that Nicholas mentioned earlier was the emotion side of humans and human decision-making. My take on a lot of that is that those emotions and things often lead us to behave in ways that are useful at a larger coherence layer beyond just us as an individual, right? Like our empathy, our jealousy, like there's these different things that have to do with a social group management, right? And that the creatures that behaved in those ways ended up functioning better in bigger groups and survived as a result. Those genes got passed on. But there's layers that go beyond like what we would think of as a single organism. And Jarod would probably be the first to point out that humans aren't a single organism. We've got microbiomes.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're a colony. We're a kind of colony of all sorts of stuff. There's another angle on this, which I think is interesting. Is if I'm sure you've all heard of Bucky Fuller, Richard Buckminster Fuller. He wrote a book back in the 60s, where actually it's a collection of his lectures and presentations called Utopia or Oblivion. The mid-1960s, right?
Beating around the bush as usual.
Yeah. And actually, there's some very good stuff in there. And one of the points he makes is that he says in the book, in the introduction, I think it is. I mean, I read this probably decades ago, but I still remember this as sort of stuck in my mind. He said that he learned what some people call systems thinking, which enabled him to do amazing things like build the Dynaxion car in the 1930s and the geodesic dome and stuff. He said he learned systems thinking because he joined the US Navy before the First World War, before 1914, yeah? And they taught systems thinking, which is like this idea of organizing things by understanding what your identity is and knowing how to roll that out based on context. And he says that the US Navy learned all that stuff from the British Royal Navy, and the Royal Navy doing that stuff was what enabled the British to run the planet from the 19th century with no long distance communications because there wasn't any. So you could, in its heyday, the Royal Navy was ruling the seas all over the planet for 100 years, from sort of 1815 to the outbreak of the First World War. And it could take, for a lot of that time, there were only about 70 people sitting in the Admiralty building in Whitehall running the whole thing. So at the center, there's just about 70 guys writing letters and hoping that the letters might arrive at a ship that may never get the letter, or it might get it 6 months later. How the hell did it work? Because those captains knew what it meant to be a captain and a representative of Britain, and they knew what they were supposed to do anywhere on the planet. And that's how it worked, very much the way we're talking. And what screwed it up was the invention of long-distance radio transmissions, where in 1914, both the British and the Americans put in long-distance radios in their ships so the guys at the center could boss the ships around from the center. And suddenly, the next thing you know is there are hundreds of people, bureaucrats at the center. Now there are more admirals of the Royal Navy than there are ships, because it just fucked the whole thing up, because they lost the plot and became obsessed with controlling everything from a center.
Command and control.
Command and control. And it blew the whole thing up and screwed it.
Yeah.
I think that's really significant, actually.
A lot of the research around that sort of stuff was done by Noam Chomsky, by the way. People don't realize it, but his ideas have a strikingly different effect in application than they do from a broader public intellectual political position.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I like to separate out. I mean, there's a fantastic book called Debt, the First 5,000 Years.
Yeah.
Which is just brilliant, by David Graeber.
Yeah.
But what's brilliant about it is that the guy is an anthropologist. He's generally, it's a bit like Chomsky being perceived as a sort of left-wing public intellectual. Like Graeber's the guy that founded the Occupy movement, actually. He's the intellectual underpinning of the Occupy movement. But I see him as more significant as an anthropologist. The anthropological insight, I think, is much more significant than being a left-wing or a right-wing politician or boring shit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Who cares,
Yeah.
That's missing the point.
Could you mention a different name, Trevor, than David Graeber?
No,
You're talking about David Graeber there.
Debt, the First 5,000 Years. Yeah, David Graeber.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, Chomsky got mentioned. I was just mentioning Chomsky there. Yeah.
Cool.
No, Chomsky. Yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't read that, Josh, that's a pretty good book, Debt, the First 5,000 Years.
It really is. It's fantastic. It's a brilliant piece of work.
I recommended a book by the name of this guy last time, and
What
it
a
is
name.
called
This guy.
Structure the structure of world history, and this is the research that Graeber uses. This is the actual anthropologist that David Graeber is referring to.
Cool.
And that book grows hair on your brain. If you're into Graeber, I seriously recommend reading that one.
Cool. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Great. Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Interesting session, guys.
Yeah. Just a heads up, next Sunday we are doing a salon at 9:30 a.m. Pacific. I think it's 5:30 p.m. Central European time. And that's going to be, the topic is an article that Arthur Brock wrote called "The Future of Governance is Not Governments." And it's just a little short 6-minute article, but it's pretty good. And
I've read that. It's really good.
Yeah, we're going to have a decent chat, I think. So bring comments or questions, and we'll chat then.
Nice one.
I'll just throw out really fast. I did have an ulterior motive. I'm kind of thinking about what my next step is, and I've been kind of searching around for different opportunities. So I saw that you guys are looking for some sort of summer residency program.
Yep.
So that was just kind of my ulterior motive. Just putting out, I might be interested in that.
If you're interested, there's an application online. You can find it on our website under Participate Opportunities, and fill that out, and you'll get included in the. We've got a dozen or more applicants so far. Not all of whom are looking to do a residency. Some of whom want to come work with us, but don't necessarily want to come live in San Francisco. Yeah, go ahead and start there.
And please apply sooner rather than later if you're keen on that, because we're moving fast.
Yeah,
on filling those spots. So
sure.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Great session. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Bye.
Happy Sunday.